Imposter syndrome says we're not authors.
But here's our books.
And here's our podcast. We are two book nerds talking about our indie author experiences
to spread the love of indie publishing and help other indies not feel alone.
Thanks for joining us, and now on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of Indie Book Nerds Podcast. We are your hosts, Jade Neoma
and Morgan Christensen. And today we're excited to welcome our guest, Katee Stein.
Hello.
Hey. Katee is a Canadian author of science fiction and fantasy. Her debut novel, Glass Helix, a YA dystopian romance, came out in 2023 with Stag Beetle Books. And her first indie release, a general market high fantasy, Earthbound, came out in September.
And a brief introduction into Earthbound. Every oath holds power. In a land where the earth spawns terrible beasts capable of moving through all but stone, the sky bestows power to those bound by oaths. As earthbound creatures invade, bringing with them chaos and whispers of a coming war, protector and overseer Tehran fights to keep his people safe. After losing his best friend to the beasts and with the stability of the region deteriorating, Tehran heads to the capital to plead for support from the Order of the Sky. Some content warnings for that is violence, mild swearing, torture, miscarriage, child endangerment, and death.
Amazing. Death in a fantasy book? What's that like? I don't know. All right. Well, to get us started in, Katee, what is your novel about? And we kind of mentioned when it released, but if you wanted to go over that, like specific dates, let us know.
Yeah, okay. So I actually have it here. I was prepared. So Earthbound, it came out this September, so it's only been out for a couple months. And kind of like the blurb suggests, it's a mix of like, if you could take the monsters from Dune, so we have monsters that move through the earth, and then maybe like a magic system based around oaths, and like Way of Kings or something like that, you know, kind of the words you speak hold power. And I sometimes throw in The Mandalorian as another comp because it's got that sort of like, if you were planet bound but had that sort of pacing and adventure, we're off. Like we're moving, we're gonna be doing stuff the whole time. So
awesome. It sounds amazing. All those comp titles put together sounds like a pot of things that I would definitely like to get a scoop of. Well, to let us know a little bit more about you, what is your writing journey and what brought you to the writer you are today?
I loved reading that question because I was like, wow, that's loaded. Like, in the best way. But like on a strictly kind of like timeline wise, I started writing seriously 6.5 years ago. And it really was just writing was always something I really enjoyed, wanted to do. Writing a novel was something that was like a personal goal of mine. I was like, okay, I want to do that one day. But it felt like it was always a tomorrow thing, you know, that life is busy, had little ones, you know, jobs, whatever else. There was always something that I was using as an excuse not to really like dedicate my time to it. And there was a bit of a journey, like internal journey of realizing like, oh, the things that I'm using as excuses aren't really the reasons. It was an interior, like sort of like internal fear, right? It was like, ooh, if I actually try to do this and I can't, that was really tender. You know, it was like that I held writing so special and so kind of close to my heart that the idea of failing at it was truly terrifying, you know. But you start to get older and you go, if I don't do this now, I won't do it, you know. And that would be the far bigger pain, I think, was recognizing like having not even tried would have been the true tragedy of it. So it just motivated me to like, okay, like here, let's go. I'm going to first, you know, finish my first manuscript. I'm going to just start. And that moment, yeah, it was like 6.5 years ago. And from there kind of, you know, as you write, as you learn, as you know, kind of get into the publishing world a bit and see what's all around you. I think my own goals and aspirations kind of shifted and changed and continue to develop as I move forward. But where once I was like, well, I'm going to see if I can write a book. now it's shifted to I will. I'm going to continue writing. This is what I want to do. This is, I feel like, just one of those things that I was put on the earth to do. You know what I mean? Like this is part of what makes me me. And so whatever, kind of path that takes, I'm not entirely sure. I think it moves and changes as we go, but I know that writing books is what I want to do.
That's awesome. I think probably everybody listening can relate to that fear when it comes to writing, and definitely the tenderness. I feel that way when it comes to my own writing, that recently actually I've been grappling with all this like imposter syndrome and facing all of these fears that are coming back that are telling me like, maybe you're not cut out for this and maybe you're not good at this. And I have to remind myself that this is what I choose to do and what I want to do. And thankfully Morgan here is the voice of reason. So just very calmly, she is like, well, what would you do if you weren't going to write? Like, what would you want to pursue that fulfills you in the same way? Just easy question. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. I don't want to stop writing, and I'll probably have to keep writing. And then I think to myself, well, if I write and then I just keep them to myself, then I'm like, no, I kind of want to publish them, and I want other people to read them. So I definitely empathize and relate with those tender feelings when it comes to writing. And I'm really proud of you for continuing to push and to put yourself out there. That's really great. And now that we've talked a little bit about how you got into writing, can you tell us a little bit about how Earthbound, like what inspired Earthbound?
Oh yeah. I love I love this one because I think you guys probably can relate, right? Like sometimes it's just these really odd little moments that inspire something. And I just so vividly remember the moment for Earthbound because I was driving to work. I was working full time at the time, and I had like a 45-minute drive every day. And so I was up really early. We drove through the mountains. It was always really beautiful, but this particular morning, the mist was really low and was hanging over the fields. And so you couldn't really see the ground. And out of the mist was this big gnarled root of a tree trunk, sort of fallen tree. And I just remember thinking, oh, can you imagine if that was just like some sort of monster coming up out of the ground? And then, of course, I'm like, I wonder how you would farm if you had to be worried about a monster coming out of the ground and eating you. And I wonder, so all of a sudden it just started like the world just started kind of expanding in terms of, like if you were in a this agricultural sort of area, what would that look like? And definitely really inspired the first and kind of primary setting of the town that they're in and where these monsters show up. So, and then from there, like the world was one thing, and then the characters kind of came from a whole different set of inspiration. But I just loved how it all kind of spawned from that one moment.
Yeah, we love to hear what inspires writers because it's always something different. And I think that's what makes it unique is that we can see things. You know how people say photographers have the eye? I think writers also have the eye, and we just express it through words instead of necessarily taking pictures. And so, yeah, I love hearing about like what inspired it and love hearing how it started as just this something that almost sounds kind of spooky, like a monster coming out of the mist, and then being like, and how do people farm? I love that. It almost feels like those like spooky farm cozy games that you can play. And it's like, what if this was like a little bit spookier? And I love that. I love that. Well, what are some of your favorite magical elements in your book, and how did you approach building them into your high fantasy story?
Yeah, so that is kind of where the character inspiration came in, actually. Was very tied to the magic system. So there was like this old Bible story. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story of Samson. He's like this strong man, sort of. It's just one of those like random stories, from the Old Testament. And it's, but the whole weird part of the story is that like, in order for him to have power, he had to follow these like really weird rules. And so it was like he wasn't allowed to cut his hair and he wasn't allowed to eat certain things or whatever. And just that idea of like, that was what gave him strength, was following these very specific rules. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like so for this story, it's like, it's a mix of that where the overseers need to speak like words, and their oaths hold immense power. And then they have assurances paired with that. So, those are like the little weird idiosyncrasies where it's like, oh, I can't eat this or I can't do that. And if they follow those things, they have power. And if they don't, their strength leaves them. And so the whole like religious order and everything that kind of came out of it was just from that singular sort of like old story in my head somewhere where I was like, oh, that's kind of like, because it wasn't about this character being moral. Like Samson in his story is not really a great guy. Like he does some okay things, but overall he's not a particularly great guy. But that wasn't what his power was tied to. It was tied to like, don't cut your hair, and that's I just thought that was so random, and I just wanted to kind of run with it and see what I could do.
For sure. Yeah, it sounds super interesting. And it's always, so fun when you can bring in something from our world and put it into theirs. And,
Mm-hmm.
it comes out super realistic because the way that you say that their words uh, have meaning and their power, there's like power in the words. I mean, as authors, we can, I think we can all agree there's like so much power in our words, but even like, just going your day to day, there's all these different words. Even like having negative, I guess, kind of like a negative outlook on life or a positive, and being able to speak that, like, and how you kind of like self-talk yourself up or down, like it definitely resonates, and that's really cool that it's like in your book. And I think because it feels way realistic because like it's a real thing, like magical world or our world. So
Yeah, I love that too. Like and that's obviously separate from that original inspiration was just kind of a seed idea and then making it its own. But I loved playing with these themes of like, um, the words we speak matter, and the promises we make matter, and the promises we make to ourselves matter. You know what I mean? It's like we just kind of see these characters grappling with what are they going to hold up as the most important things. What is it? Just because it's a rule? Is it because you have a feeling? Is it because like what is going to drive you? And each of the characters kind of approach it differently, but it was really fun to just explore for sure.
yeah, really, really cool. I mean, that's like just character building, figuring out their values and their priorities and their wants and needs, all those little fictional friends. So
That's
what made you choose the elements of your book that you did? For example, like your monstrous beasts and binding oaths. I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit,
Mhm.
but if you want to elaborate on some other stuff, feel free.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Maybe like because the monsters they came in as like a big part of just they're not just animals in the world, but it really starts to form. Um, I think just dynamics of how this world works, and this idea that like so it's called the mercurial. It's not stable, right? We get this sense that there's a lot of shifting ground, and we're trying to find where we stand, which plays with these overall themes of what oaths are we going to stand by and what. So I loved how that kind of paralleled. It's like, well, can we trust the ground we're on? And I thought that was a really neat sort of way to have the world building echo the deeper themes. Um, so these monsters, these Earthbound, are there, but they're also serving another purpose, while being kind of fun and cool to play with. Just in terms of like action and what's happening next. Trying to think what else, what other kind of elements. I think for my characters, I was really wanting to bring in. You kind of alluded to it there, just those real feelings, the real conflicts. We have adult characters in complex relationships, um, and I wanted to reflect that tension, that inner turmoil. Like we don't always make great choices. um, and one of my favorite little kind of pieces of writing advice was it's like this phrase where it's like allowing our characters the dignity to be human and make mistakes. And I think I fully embrace that in Earthbound, where these characters are fully human. And sometimes people are, I get comments and DMs where people are like, "Oh, I can't believe it. They were being so stupid." I'm like, have you met people? Like, this is us, And in that, I hope, as much as we're yelling at them, there's also that sense of like, where there's going to be some piece of it that we can probably relate to, even if it's not their exact choices or the situations they find themselves in, but in being a person that is feeling pulled or conflicted or tried in a certain way, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that does make your characters more realistic. And I try to do the same thing. I even have my little emotional thesaurus book to make it all
I love
more, yeah, make it more realistic and learn about, the feelings that we feel and how our bodies even react to it. Makes it more realistic within your writing. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, and I also get, I recently, I'm working on my book too, and beta readers have come back and been like, why is this character being so dumb? Like, come on, you're like risking the whole thing that we're working for here. And it's like, well, he's not in a great situation and he's very optimistic. Like, that's his personality. That makes sense for him. And it's okay to make mistakes. And boy, but it also makes a great story. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
As much as we'd
No.
love to have them just sitting and having a picnic all the time, that'd be pretty
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah, there's no conflict there. So, yeah, and I
Yeah.
love that you gonna go into some of the more in-depth stuff with complicated relationships and complicated humans. And yeah, no, it's totally more realistic. It makes me want to read your book a bit more. Um, let's see. Lost my place. Okay. What do you hope readers take away from reading Earthbound? Like, what is the overall message you want them to take away now that we know all this amazing stuff about it?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I want people to feel like they've been able to like step out of life for a moment, and when they read a book that is, for myself, like that's probably the place where books have meant the most, is that I get to just escape, not that we always need to escape, but sometimes, it's just nice to be able to like go on an adventure in another world. And so I hope that it's immersive for people. I hope that they're swept away into a story. I hope that they connect deeply with the characters, even characters that they don't agree with or frustrated. I hope that there's enough of a sense of kind of, yeah, that deeper reality that we can understand where characters are coming from, and that I hope that they root for them. And I think thematically, yeah, whatever anybody wants to take from it, I think is great. I think for myself, I'm always amazed at like how themes come out as you write. Like, it's not like I went into it going, I'm going to write this theme and I'm this sort of, but that said, the themes do develop through the story. And I think it's just, if it helps people, like, I dedicated Earthbound to the mess makers, because I hope that if you've made a mess, you can see that you're not alone. I think we all make missteps, and we all, struggle in different ways at different points in our life. And like I said, it doesn't have to be the same sort of struggles that they're going through. But I think just looking at this, like, even the most noble are fallible, and we all trip up, even with our best intentions. But there's a way forward, like just that sort of, yeah, I hope that there's some good, some that you leave a story feeling encouraged and hopeful.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message. I definitely relate to wanting your readers to have an immersive experience. And then also I relate heavily to not knowing the theme necessarily when you go in, because for me, that's always been a difficulty before writing something, is to come up with all the bells and whistles right off of the bat. And I know that there's some people who can't write unless they have all of those things. I'm envious of those people because I cannot do that. For me, it has to come out how, as I'm writing this story. And so I love that it turned into something that has a really powerful powerful message, which is that you can make a mistake and you can be okay and you can grow from that, and you're not defined by your mistakes. I really love that message, because as authors we can definitely take some words from that and know that our first books don't have to be perfect, our second books don't have to be perfect, none of our books have to be perfect.
Yeah,
well
absolutely.
well tell us, what is your favorite scene or dialogue in Earthbound?
Some of my favorite scenes are definitely spoilers. But I would say the elements of the scene that I love the most is when we get a picture of like this sort of raw sort of emotion. So in Earthbound, there's a scene where it was actually one of those ones that I ended up writing quite late in the like editing process. I was like, had gone through quite a few rounds of beta readers and back and forth and all this sort of stuff. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, we need this. We need this scene for this character. And it's just seeing them grapple with the consequences of what's going on, and the like expressing that internal sort of distress and turmoil. So we kind of get this really stripped down, raw look at how it's impacting them. And I love it. And when I heard it in audio, because that I had an audiobook done, and the narrator Magnus, he did such a fantastic job of just letting all of the emotion leak into his voice, and that sort of really raw, intense sort of moment, which is, I was like all giddy and bouncing listening to that one, just because it was like, it just hits well. And I was surprised at how impacted I was by it, even though I had like written the story and I've read it a zillion times, and now I'm listening to it and it hit, and like that, I was really proud of that.
Yeah, I love that it came later in the editing process, because it feels like it's that perfecting touch. You were like, it's not the same story without this moment. And I love that it's one of your favorites too, and that it's one of those really raw emotional moments. And speaking of audio books, narrators make our dreams come true, and they show us what it feels like to be the reader, because I think as much as we read over it, we don't get to be as immersed in it as when someone is reading our work and personifying it and letting all that emotion flow into it. And it's like you almost want to cry when you hear it. That's how I felt when I first got some snippets from a narrator, and it was like, wow, I wrote this, like it sounds so good, and there's so much like there's so much meaning in this, and I didn't know I was capable of that. So yeah, I love that it turned into what it did, and it became like the impactful scene for you as the author that it did. But what was the most difficult scene or dialogue for you to write?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think the connecting timeline stuff is maybe the hardest I find, like just personally to write. And that's not really all that exciting. It's hard because everything needs to flow and make sense. Earthbound has 3 POVs, sometimes different locations, and I needed the story to flow as like a single story and not feeling like we're being yanked all over the place. So I think that sort of stuff on a technical level is probably the hardest for me. Like that's just the grind of like learning how to write well. I think, it's just like, okay, this is not as fun because it's not super emotive. We just need to make sure we get from here to here to here, and make sure everybody's flowing in the same direction. That said, I also find some of those really gut-wrenching scenes, I just find they take a toll on you. Like, I don't know. I've heard from other writers that this is the case for them. It might not be for every writer, but, when it's sad or when there's grief or anything like that, and you're putting yourself in that scene over and over and over, trying to refine and, like not skim over, and you're trying to just be in that moment. I find that really exhausting. I kind of like will get out of those scenes and be like, oh, I just need like it to be a puddle on the floor for a minute. And so it takes a different sort of toll than like the real technical grind, but yeah.
Yeah, the technical grind sucks. I feel like, as Jade mentioned, some people have it all figured out and like an outline, but even sometimes the outline gets messed up.
Mm.
Lately, I mean, I'm a discovery writer, so I like jigsaw puzzle things around, and I'm in my current edits. I'm like, oh no, that's not going to work here, and that's going to go better over here, and I can, yeah, all that technical flowy stuff, and then just making sure it all blends. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's hard. And
Yeah.
yeah, very much those gut wrenching scenes are hard because, yeah, as you say, I think you put it perfectly. You do kind of have to sit there with them in order to, write the right words to like be able to describe it and make it realistic. So yeah, you do have to like sit in that scene and sit with the character and feel what they might be feeling. And it is a freaking drag. You always have to like have self-care afterwards or during. I try to do during. I have to be in like the right kind of mindset. I mean, there were days where I'm like, "Oh God, we got to edit this scene." So I have to like, I don't think I can do it today. Let's just,
Yeah.
maybe skip to the next one. But if I do like be in the right mindset, have a furry writer assistant and a nice snack and a favorite drink, what have you. So yeah,
Yeah.
it is a thing. And I don't know if I feel like there's different videos or maybe books about author self-care in that regard. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a valid and real
Yeah.
thing that we go through.
I
So,
like that. I'm glad. I'm glad I'm not alone.
yes, no, 100%. Well, which character gave you the most trouble as an author?
Um, I always blame that on Amelia. So I have Nox, Tehran, and Amelia are my three POV characters, and um, I just found Amelia challenging to write for a few different reasons. One, I think, because she's like an unreliable narrator to herself. Like she, like why she thinks she's doing things isn't always why she's doing things, And so trying to make sure that we're like, I'm doing justice to the complexity of what she's facing was a bit tricky. There, it was layered, right? Like she thinks she's doing it for this reason, but we all know that she's doing it for this, like that sort of deeper motivation stuff was there. Um, and some of it was because I'm trying not to be spoilery here. I think she faces a tremendous amount, and I, as a woman and as a female character in this story, I didn't want to cheapen anything that she's facing or the decisions that she's doing. I find people's responses to her really interesting. Um, I've really come to love her as a character. And yeah, I don't know. I just think she's difficult because she faces a lot of difficult things. And I just didn't want her to be flat. She deserved to be kind of full bodied.
100%. Yeah, I feel that. Um, yeah, because we can't treat our female character. I mean, there's been enough female characters out there that have been treated with, I'm gonna say it like disrespect.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
just been, yeah, they're just flat and like just you saying, well, she's doing it like this, or but we know she's doing it, but she doesn't know. Like that's layers,
Yeah.
and I can
Yeah.
relate to that as like a human. Like I was doing it because of
Yeah.
this, but it was really this and
Yeah.
all the, trying to analyze things. But yeah, no, and I also have a female main character that got kind of a bad rap. I mean, she was awful in the first drafts because the first drafts are awful. But even in this, like, my more finalized version, she does get still like crap for the
Yeah.
decisions that she makes or the way she acted. And it's like, nah, bro, look at all this mess she had to deal with. And she's
Yeah.
making these decisions, to go back, like whether they were right or wrong. She's a human being. So,
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's awesome that you're
Yeah.
able to do that for her.
Well, and I think it's interesting. I didn't feel that same pressure with my male characters, which I just think is an interesting sort of observation. Like, I just wasn't as worried about where, like, how people interpreted them. I think I was more worried about that with Amelia, and I wanted to be more intentional with it
Mhm.
um, because I didn't want her being written off.
For
Kind of,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I still had to, even my male characters, like, because my book takes place in a matriarchy. So, Like even them being like emotional, I was like, oh God, that's like too many crying for him. And it's like, oh no, he's allowed to cry. He has emotions. So gosh, we could have a whole vent about the patriarchy and how it messes us up, but that's another video for another time. Um,
Exactly.
so tell us how friendships, loyalty, and love are tested in your book, and how you navigated the emotional impact you wanted this story to leave on your readers.
That's a really good question. Oh, that is so central to this story. So Amelia, Tehran, and Knox are childhood friends. So there's like tons of history between them as a trio. Of course, we join them kind of like in their adult life, and Amelia and Knox are married. And so we kind of get this kind of Karen's not a third wheel, but like he's always around and just sort of those dynamics. So, and I liked, I don't get to delve into it a ton, but I did enjoy being able to show sort of like the dynamics between Amelia and Taryn early days, where they're like kind of driving each other a little bit crazy and like, and then Knox's feelings seeing his friend and his wife, everybody's sort of like all the different sides to that relationship. It's fun because I have all three POVs, right? We can kind of see from everybody's perspective. And really the central plot line is all about what is pulling at those relationships, what's challenging those relationships, what's like, their oaths get all tangled up in it. I can't say too much about all of that, but it is what drives all three of them, is how do we find a way to move forward with the people I care about. Yeah. I'm trying to think, did I finish answering that one? That's kind of
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I loved hearing about your character dynamics and learning more about how he's maybe not necessarily a third wheel, but is always kind of like in their orbit, I would say. That's really interesting to see how you kind of get a chance to talk about them when they're in the beginning stages of like learning how to navigate, and them testing out what their dynamic is going to be and figuring out how they're going to be in each other's orbit. So I love hearing about that. To pivot a little bit more towards you, what's your typical writing routine or creative process?
Yeah, I'm a discovery writer as well. I find I've just kind of like realized that I can maybe own this, is that I'm a really slow drafter. And I think part of that is because I'm a discovery writer. Um, Sometimes it doesn't just, like you were saying earlier, Jade, like that I'm jealous of people that can just outline and work it all out and have it all down. That seems to really shut down my like creative juices, and I get really overwhelmed. And then I'm like, I can't do it. So I discovery write, but the flip side of that is that even though I'm writing, there's so much working out happening as I go that it's not a quick, dump all the words on the page and you're done sort of thing. And I think I've been hard on myself for that in the past, where I'm just like, oh, I need to be able to write faster, or why am I so slow, or, kind of berating myself because I don't look like the person next to me. But that's just kind of like a real garbage way to treat myself. And really not helpful in the process, So just like kind of going, no, you know what? Like drafts are going to take me a while, and that's okay. And they take the time they take. But I find as long as I'm consistently showing up to write, the work gets done. It might not be glorious, big, piles of words all at once, but the work gets done. And I am an overwriter. Again, I think it links in with the like, being a discovery writer. Morgan, what you were saying, like, just trying to puzzle piece everything together, Yes. There's lots of that. I use Scrivener as a program. And the nice thing is like you can see all the files down the side. And so I have a whole section titled Misplaced Children. because they're all the files that don't have a home yet. So I was inspired by the, like people are always like, kill your darlings. So I'm like, well, if they're my darlings, then they're just my little misplaced children over here. So I have my little folder down there. And I last checked on my latest work in progress, I have something like 26,000 words down there, of just little pieces that I've probably ended up writing for me to understand the world or the characters or different, things that maybe don't fit anymore, but they end up down there just because they informed something about the story. Yeah. And I think really process wise, I'm a big believer in the story comes alive and really comes together through edits and rewrites. It's like, that's the place for me that I see it transform from this hot mess of a draft into something that I'm like proud to share with people. It's not always quick, and it's definitely not without a few tears usually. But yeah, it's just being dedicated to see the story through to what it needs to be. So it's just keep going. A little bit of Dory, just keep swimming sort of mentality, and someday you get there and you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is where I want it to land.
Yeah, something you said stuck out to me when you said that it's kind of for you to figure out the story. I think that is so key, because I think I've been doing that unintentionally, is writing certain scenes kind of just to get myself to understand the story a little bit more, even if I go back and I backtrack and take those things out. And I can also definitely relate to when you were talking about having difficulty accepting the speed at which you write, because for me during Nano last year in 2023, I wrote my first book and I did 75,000 words in a month, and after that I was under so much pressure writing the second book to repeat those results. And the initial reason why the first book I had so much come out was because it was the first book and I was discovering the world, like you said. And so much of that book ended up getting rewritten. And so much of it, like, that I had put in during Nano was completely wiped away, because that's what I was doing. I was like figuring out what I was trying to talk about and where the world was going, and then having to go back in and make those changes during editing. So now that I can't recreate that speed that I wrote the first book in, I've had to come to terms with the fact that, like, maybe this is good for the writing. Maybe this like lets it marinate a little bit more, and maybe I'll do less of that complete rewriting of like the whole ending and things like that, just because I'll have a better grip on the story if I take my time. So I love to hear that you're kind of accepting too that you might be a slow writer, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But you did talk about another work in progress. Tell us, what are your publishing plans for the future?
So right now I just finished the first draft of the sequel for Earthbound. So Skysworn is set to release next year. Hopefully late spring, but as we were saying, I'm more committed to getting this book written well and refined. And so that's like, I'm putting all of my energy into that kind of late spring release. But we'll see how it all lines up. I haven't put out an official publishing date yet, just because I want to give myself that freedom to like explore, like, be able to actually do the work and work through it. Yeah, I think that's the big one right now. There's a few other things on the horizon, but that's kind of where I'm pouring my energy right now, is Skysworn. And you both mentioned that you're have been writing sequels. And I have to say, there is a whole different thing with writing a sequel. This is my first sequel, and I'm like, I don't know why. Well, I could probably articulate some reasons why, but it is very challenging in trying to like continue a story forward, to making sure that it like honors everything in the first book, that it brings something fresh and new and punchy for the second book, that resolves ongoing threads, right? Like, there's a lot that goes into a sequel that you don't have to consider in a standalone. Yeah, it's challenging.
No, 100%. Yeah, it's always like, because I've heard about even like television series, any kind of series that you have, the next one has to be just as good, if not better, than the one before. And that's like kind of the goal. I mean, no pressure on that, you guys. But
Yeah.
but yeah, bringing in something new like a punch and making it yeah be a nice follow up from the previous is it is tricky. And but you know that's what we have beta readers and editors and all the wonderful the whole process for. So
Yeah.
we'll be okay. No pressure.
Yes, totally true.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Well, that's exciting to hear that the sequel will be coming out. Um,
Yeah.
well, what made you choose indie publishing once you got your books written?
Yeah. So my first book, Glass Helix, was published through a small press. It was a great experience. They were really good to me. And but they primarily are YA, and I was wanting to move general market. Um, so that was kind of like there was one piece of the puzzle there. I was like, okay, I'm not going to stay with my same publisher. So I had already extensively queried Earthbound actually. So it was one of those books that was sitting on my shelf. Um, I really thought I wanted to do traditional publishing. It's not even something I would be ideologically opposed to if the opportunity arose, but I also was like tired of banging against the door. Like you query and query and query, and I'm like, I really think this book has an audience, and I really, from the feedback I was getting from my beta readers and just my own, heart for this story, I'm like, I don't think I'm that far off. I feel like there's a home for this. Um, and I think just gaining the confidence through, seeing and walking through the process with my debut novel, in a small press, I realized this isn't out of reach. I can do this, and so I decided to tackle it because I'm like, well, if it's sitting on the shelf anyways, let's go for it. Um, and so that was like, honestly, it was just kind of this like culmination of a few different things in the journey that I was like, all right, I'm going to take the leap. Um, I'm really glad I did. Like it's not because it's not without its, pitfalls and challenges, but um, it's wildly satisfying to walk through all the different pieces and portions of it, to be able to really make it your own, and like just simple little things and, the art, the maps, like you get a say on all of that. Um, and I love that. Yeah, I just love being able to put together. It's like kind of wrapping a present for somebody you really care about. It's like you put this extra attention, and when you finally have it there ready, it's like, oh, look at this pretty little thing I made. So yeah, I found that a really just fantastic part of the journey, and I intend to continue, um, at least for the time being, doing it, through indie publishing and stuff, and just continuing to try to find the readerships that are interested in my stories.
Yeah. Oh, that gift thing really strikes a chord because it's really a gift to ourselves, right?
Mm.
Like, we did it for ourselves. It's an achievement that, like you said, we can say, "Hey, I did that thing and did it all by myself." Though it could, you could go with the route of having like a team and everything, but there's also this other thing, and I'm impatient. I want my book
Yeah,
now, and I want my gift right now, and I don't care.
yeah,
I'm impatient.
yeah.
But no, yeah, that's amazing, and yeah, I tried the traditional route too. It did not take very many rejections. I mean, I've heard of people going through like hundreds of them. I probably went through maybe 20. Yeah, I went through probably 20 before I was like, this sucks. Like,
Yeah.
but I also knew that my book needed work because I don't regret doing it either because, some people did respond and, it builds kind of a tougher skin. Not everyone's
Mhm.
gonna like your art and your gift, but, jerks. But,
Yeah.
but, it builds up that skin and then even, going through agent bios and seeing what they want, like it's kind of market research as well. So it's not, it wasn't a useless time spent. It was like I don't regret it either, but I'm impatient
Yeah.
and I want it right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Well, this is our favorite question on the Indie Book Nerds podcast. What does indie publishing mean to you?
Mm. I think it kind of piggybacks on what you were just saying. There are really good, valid things about the traditional market. Like any author that publishes traditionally, I think it's great. If it works for you and that's, the path that's been open to you, I think it's fantastic. Um, that said, it's primarily a market. Like that's I think that was part of, I queried for quite a few years, and um you start to see that it's like, even, some of my critique partners and stuff like that with their agents, and they're on sub, and you're listening to all these stories, and what's driving this whole industry is it sellable? So of course there's like, yes, is it a good story or whatever, but they're looking, is it sellable on a mass scale? You know? Um, and I think recognizing that allowed me to let go of the idea that only good books were published traditionally. And if we couldn't publish traditionally, now we're just doing second best. Because I think I think it's a mindset that a lot of people have, frankly, unfortunately. And I was one of them. And I think in like kind of getting to know what was going on in the publishing industry, watching kind of the ups and downs, the pros and the cons, you start to see that it's not always that if a book isn't picked up, that it's not good. Actually, that's, sometimes that's the case. Maybe your book needs more work, but that's not always the case. And, sometimes it's just you're pitching something that's in a flooded market. And I think fantasy is a hard, place to query because of that. I think there's a lot coming at those agents, and there's not a lot output the same way, if that makes sense. Like there's definitely a bottleneck there. Um, it just so indie publishing and being able to change my mindset really shifted how I saw the work that I was doing. And for myself, this isn't again, this is like we're kind of like overcoming a lot of these sort of like old maybe thoughts about indie publishing, that it's just like, oh, it's just a hobby and I'm just going to throw a book out there and I don't really care and it's just for fun. Um, as much as like I enjoy writing, um, I want to take this seriously. This is my career. This is the way I want to present my work. So I want to come to it with professionalism and be putting out a professional grade product. And the fact that indie publishing allows me to do that, and not sit in the bottleneck and not bang against the door, going, let me in, let me in, let me in. That's been a gift. Like that's hasn't always been an option. The fact that it is an option, yeah, I'm just glad that it is. I'm glad that I move forward this way. And like I said, I don't know if it's for every book ever, but I think I needed this to keep myself moving forward, period. Like to keep writing, to keep knowing, like, after many rejections or ghosts or, all those things, it takes a big toll. And it's hard to keep believing that you have something worthwhile to write and to offer when there's just doors being shut in your face. But I think in being able to like indie publish, I'm finding those readers, and I'm finding, all this stuff like Earthbound. The reception for Earthbound has been fantastic and it's just really blowing me away. Obviously, I love this book. I was excited about this book, but then seeing it's like, this is it. Like there are people who also love this book, who also are invested in this story, who want the next book. And that in and of itself is like just such a huge boost to like keep you moving forward as well. So yeah, it helped me move forward then, and it's helping me move forward now.
Yeah, I also came to a similar realization about traditional publishing is it's not necessarily that only good books are being published traditionally. I think it's that they have a different mindset. They want to sell as many books as possible, and they're trying to
Yeah.
only take books that they think are going to sell as many books as possible. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
necessarily that what you have written is not worthwhile and that there isn't an audience that's going to love it. I think we can all relate to having some obscure obsession with something that no one else knows or cares about, but it means everything to us and it holds a really special place in our hearts. And I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase your favorite author's favorite author. And so there's like this idea that this person that you idolize and you love so much and you love their writing, there's someone who that person looks up to as an author, and there's someone that that person thinks that their work is incredible. And I think something that we don't recognize all the time is that that comes with some level of like obscurity or undergroundness level to it, where
Mhm.
your favorite author is going to know and love authors that you have no idea about or that you've never heard about, and be inspired by things that you might not have thought they were ever inspired by. And so I think that that's what's
Yeah.
the beauty of indie publishing, is being able to tell those stories anyway and be able to put those things out there, and for the fans that find them are going to love them and are going to obsess over them. And I think it's less about whether your book is good in indie publishing, but whether or not you can find your audience and find the people who are going to love
Mhm.
the book as you see it and you wanted it to be, and you get that freedom with indie publishing. So I find that
Mhm.
answer to be just so like wholesome and so like well-rounded, and it's really insightful too, I think, when it comes to other people deciding whether or not indie publishing is for them. So thank you for sharing that with us. Moving just a little bit towards maybe something not so great, but what were your biggest obstacles when it came to actually like publishing the book? So after they were written, what did you encounter that slowed you down as far as publishing, and how did you overcome that?
Mhm. I think really what really are like big barriers that can happen in indie publishing is that we fund everything up front, right? So we need editors and we need, all these sort of cover design. I mean, if you want to put out a good product, like I was saying, like I'm committed to that. Okay, now how do I do it without spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars? Because we know that that's going to take, you know, many years, barring some great, great miracle to come back in. So we need, if we're going to do this, any way that's sustainable, then we need to have a model that isn't basically just bleeding us dry to produce each book. Not even considering the work, like you're saying, right? It's considering all these other expenses. Um, and I don't know if I have a good answer for that yet. I'm still really exploring what that can look like because I'm not far enough along in my career and with my backlist and stuff like that where I have any sort of sustainable income that I can go, oh, I know I can budget this amount of money and I'm going to be able to do these sort of things. It's a lot of like, I'm going to do this work on a hope and a prayer, which is typical with any startup of any, business or, kind of venture you're going to go on. Um, So I'm okay taking on that risk right now, but I think it's my job also to now figure out how to do it sustainably moving forward. So I think, honestly, how I approached Earthbound um, was I really leaned into my community, which um, in some ways I am uncomfortable with because I would love to be paying everybody the way that I feel that they deserve to be paid. Um, but I also just didn't have money. So um, for me, what it looked like was, luckily I have an amazing community around me of fellow authors and writers, people that are very talented and skilled. Um, and so my developmental edits were all just with my critique partners. Um, I did have I borrowed my copy editor from Stag Beetle, and so I was able to and she gave me a crazy deal, sort of like we kind of worked out some stuff there. And I had another friend that did copy and line edits for me for free, just because, this is kind of like, this is where we were, I'm like, okay, I'm just really leaning on these people. I put out a call for proofreaders because I knew it needed to be proofed and I was trying to proof it, but I knew I was missing stuff and just said, hey, I'll give you a free copy of the book. And I had this amazing, woman step up and she's like, yeah, I'd love to proof it. So it's just like, um, in some ways you kind of, you're like, oh, we're supposed to, make sure that we pay, top dollar for our editor and top dollar for this and top dollar for that. And I would love to. More people buy the books, I promise I'll pay the editors, But the long and short of it is if you don't have the funds, then I think you have to rely on the people around you. And I feel like Earthbound is a really good example that it can be done well. If you have the right people and you have the right, sort of backing, it does mean that I think there was a lot more time and energy put into that process just because we had to go over and over. But if you're dedicated to seeing it through to a polished product, I think it's doable, So there was just a lot of exchanges of reading for each other, of, leveraging each other's kind of strengths and we got a book out of it, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think indie publishing offers something that's very unique and beautiful, which is the opportunity to have people see your vision when no one else does, and to be willing to get on your level and to believe in your book. I know you said that you struggled with it to accept the help from your community. That's actually something that I went through as well. I had an emergency basically and lost all of my funds, all of my savings, like drained every dime that I had, and it was horrible. And my community really came and like helped me so much, and there were so many people that were willing to do editing and that were willing to do, I had Jennifer Hoffman did my cover completely for free just because she wanted me to have a nice cover, and she was so kind and she worked with me so much. And it was hard because I was always thinking like I'm indebted to Jennifer now, like I need to pay her back immediately somehow and come up with the money. And then there's also this piece of me where I think she posted something, I think on Threads, where she was talking about how much she loves doing these free covers because she likes to kind of level the playing field. And by her expressing how much it meant to her to be able to provide these to people, when she has the time and when she, is able to, and the project fits and all these types of things, when she's able to, that it gives her joy. And I started trying to think of it the same way, which is kind of what inspired Morgan and I to start Indie Book Nerds, was just wanting to extend that hand and to help other indies. And like I said, you get to see people who believe in your book before anybody else does, before there's this big publishing name behind it, before, your copy is on every single shelf. There are people who see it and are like, you know what? Earthbound sounds really good. I'm going to pick it up anyway. And that is so beautiful about indie publishing. I love it. I love being indie so much.
I think that whole community piece, you're right, is that because we can't do it alone, most of us can't do it alone, we really do rely on each other. And that does create just such a different bond, I think, because it's like, we're in it together. I feel like when I put out my book, I know it's a whole team, and I am like, as thrilled as I am that it's out there, I know that they're equally thrilled. And that's so exciting. I had a review come in the other day, and it was so fun to see the people who had helped bring this book taking equal joy in it, right? Like they're like, yes, because it's like, it becomes almost our book, right? Like, and I don't know. I think it's pretty cool that we get to do that together.
Yeah, I love the heartwarming sides of indie publishing. I know we focus a lot on like, the difficulties and finding the funds and finding the readers and marketing and getting ourselves to even finish a draft, actually. I think that it's nice to also gush about the good sides and about how the community is like so strong, so strong. Well, tell us, have you struggled with writer's block, imposter syndrome, or motivation on your writing journey, and how have you coped with that? I know we talked about it a little bit, but...
Yeah, I feel well, and I think because, like even just where I started, right, was kind of going, okay, this is sacred ground for me, being able to write. So then that sort of vulnerability is out there. I was thinking about it the other day, because I have experienced quite a bit of like kind of, I guess it would be considered sort of writer's block, imposter syndrome, something in there where it's just like, I don't know. Why can't I get this story out? I just was really grinding and trying to like move forward. And talking with a friend the other day, I almost kind of labeled it differently, where it was like vulnerability fatigue, like it's that sense of like, do I put myself out there again? Do I dare to hope again? Do I try again? And kind of like you were saying at the very beginning, right? It's like, what else would you do? Is this really what is this what you really feel like you need to do, what you have to do, what you want to do? And I think there is like that, you kind of come back to those places and you have to check in with yourself again. Is like, is this what I want to do? Because you see the cost of that. But the answer continues to be for me, yeah, this is what I want to do. Okay. So I think for myself, it's learning how to acknowledge and look after those sort of emotional, mental side of it, where, I don't read reviews. Not because like there's great reviews. My husband reads me good reviews, but I don't like, or if somebody tags me in a good review, I hope they're good reviews if they're tagging me, but you know what I mean? Like, so I'll read those ones, but I don't go and read through everything in like Amazon or Goodreads, just because that puts an extra toll on my heart, where I'm just like, oh, well, I should have maybe if I'd written that character a little, or maybe, like all of a sudden I'm overthinking all this sort of stuff. And so in those like kind of little simple ways, wherever it is that it pops up, where I'm like, oh, that is putting an extra toll on that sort of vulnerable place, I'm trying to guard that a bit more. I'm trying to like guard these spaces where I need to be creative, and I can't be creative under, feeling like all this like criticism from outside for like places where I don't have any context, right? A review is great, but if I don't understand why and what's going on and have a conversation like you do with your critique partners, it becomes largely unhelpful, really, to your writing process. So I'm just going to leave that. And even stuff like, deadlines. I like having deadlines. I work well under deadlines. I don't work well under my own mental pressure that says, I need to be this and I need to have as soon as I start getting like really hard on myself, like, okay, you should be further along and stuff, I freeze up too. And I think that's a lot of like sort of my writer block, is often I'm focusing on the wrong thing. I don't need to be looking at the deadline. I don't need to be looking at reviews. I need to look at the story in front of me and write the story that needs to be written. That's my job. I write the story that needs to be written. Everybody else can debate if it's good or bad. and and the deadlines are going to happen as the deadlines need to happen. But my job is just to write the story and tell the story. And so if I can keep my head there, I find it frees up the creativity again. And I can get writing some more.
Yeah, all that speaks so much, Katee. Personally going through grounding myself and checking in with myself and feeling all the feelings, even the bad ones, because they're okay too. Yeah, and freaking right down to even posting a stupid video to a story on Instagram. Like, do I really want to do this? Do you like this video? Does it relate to you, as a person, or even to your book because you have an author platform? Yes, it does. It's just a stupid video. People probably won't even look through your story anyway. So yes, all of that hits really, really hard. And thank you for sharing it with us. Well, what is your best piece of advice for people who want to self-publish that you wish you would have known ahead of time?
I was thinking about this earlier and stuff, and I was like, wow, it's like there's all this technical stuff, and but really I think it comes down to, who are you doing this with? I don't think I could have done indie publishing on my own without having a really strong writing group around me. Not because I'm not capable of formatting or capable of this or capable of, of any singular piece, but I think the task as a whole is large. And there's just so many times where I'd be like, oh shoot, how am I supposed to answer this form, or how am I supposed to like import this file, or how, like there's just little things. And even in that, having people around you that have walked the path before are lifesaver, because it's not, okay, now I need to go Google and now I need to watch a YouTube video to learn how to do, like there's people around you that have done it before, and they can probably give you a much more succinct answer than all these other sort of mediums. And so if at all possible, if you've got people around you that are walking in this journey, then I would say take friend, don't do this alone. And I think, a lot of times I hear people being like, oh, it's so hard to find writing community. And I agree. I think finding people that, that you can really work closely with, that is a process. But it also, it comes. I think if you continue to show up and you continue to put yourself out there and reach out and be a good critique partner and be a good beta reader and be, be those things that you would like, you will find the people who you start to click with and that are going to believe in your story before maybe even anybody else does, right? And that are going to see it. And that's not a wasted effort. That's not, an extra. That's not you just, being social. Like, this is part of the job. I feel like, all this sort of like connecting and networking and getting to know other authors and people, all different stages of the journey, is the job. And it's so, so important to being able to like support one another, to lift one another up. And you're going to feel it yourself as well, where you're carried along sometimes when you need it. So take a friend.
That's always our biggest piece of advice too, is that we value this indie community so much. And I found that in the beginning, I don't think I necessarily even intended to build a community. I did want to make friends. I did want to have like someone to chat with about my book, but I wasn't necessarily thinking of it in the sense that like there were going to be people who supported me and wanted my book to be out there as much as I would support them and want their books to be out there. And to feel so connected and to feel stronger together is a really beautiful piece of it. And it does come with time. Like you said, it is a process. Well, that is the last of our interview questions. Are there any future goals or upcoming events, anything that you want to mention before we wrap up?
I think all that I have coming up is Skysworn releasing next spring, and I'll just be kicking around Instagram and doing the usual.
Awesome. Well, remind everyone where they can buy your book and give us your social media handles for anyone that wants to find you after the show.
Yeah, I think probably most simple for most people is you can find it on Amazon. The audiobook is on Audible. It's also on Kindle Unlimited if you subscribe to that. It should be available through Barnes & Noble and all the other ones if you're looking to order a print book. So all the usual places. You can find me on Instagram at Katee Stein. Katee is Katee. Stein. I'm on TikTok. Still to learn TikTok, and it's Katee Stein as well with no dot in the middle. And I'm also on Threads with the same as IG. So I'm just kind of like, I'm around on a few places. I like Instagram because I like the bookish community there and kind of like lend. I'm probably most prevalent there. I'm also on Substack, and I have a quarterly newsletter that goes out. And I'll be sharing a previously deleted scene from Earthbound that will be coming out into the Substack. So that will be this winter. So yeah, if you're interested, then you can find me. The link is in my bio.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Katee Stein, for being here with us for a fantastic interview. Next week, you'll be able to catch Emma Coette, author of The Silent Night, here on the Indie Book Nerds podcast.